Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, really dig in, and pull out the key insights to get you informed fast. And today, well, we've got a really fascinating combination. We're looking at some ancient legal texts, very detailed, very specific,
Right.
alongside some pretty profound philosophical, spiritual writings.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, about the sources for this particular deep dive
Yes.
is how they put these two things side by side. Something really concrete from ancient Jewish law.
Okay.
This whole legal process for a woman who's under suspicion.
Yeah.
And then this very, very abstract spiritual idea.
And then they show how that law, the details of it, actually helps us understand the spiritual concept. It's quite a connection.
Exactly, a framework.
And this spiritual idea, it's not maybe what you'd immediately thought of. It's referred to as foolishness corresponding to holiness. Connecting that to an ancient law about suspicion of impurity, that sounds like exactly the kind of surprising link we love digging into here.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because it takes this, detailed legal mechanism, something quite specific, and kind of elevates it, makes it to this powerful allegory for understanding some really fundamental dynamics.
Like the divine-human relationship.
Precisely that.
Okay, so our mission today, following these sources, it's sort of threefold. First, let's unpack the ancient law itself, get the specifics, the process.
Okay.
Second, introduce this abstract spiritual concept, foolishness corresponding to holiness. Give it some context.
Right.
And then the main event, really uncovering the surprising, profound, honestly kind of beautiful connection that our sources draw between them. And we'll really focus on this powerful theme that emerges, enduring connection, especially when things are uncertain.
Yeah, that uncertainty piece is key.
So get ready. These texts take ideas that seem worlds apart and weave them together into something really insightful.
It's a perfect example, really, of how these traditions find such deep spiritual meaning, sometimes hidden right inside what looks like, dry legal code.
Okay, let's dive in then. Let's unpack this. Our journey starts with the primary source material, getting into the details of this ancient law about a married woman suspected of impurity.
Right, the Sotah.
The Sotah, exactly. That name comes straight from the biblical passage, right, in Numbers.
Yes, Numbers chapter 5.
Yeah.
The key phrase right at the start is ki tishte ishto.
Ki tishte ishto. And that's usually translated as what? If his wife goes astray or deviates.
Something like that, yes. Goes astray, deviates. But the crucial point, and this is central for our sources, is that this law isn't about proven infidelity. It's specifically for a situation of suspicion.
Okay, suspicion, but not just any suspicion.
No, and that's absolutely vital, the lack of definitive proof. That's the whole point. The sources really emphasize this. The process kicks in when the impurity is uncertain.
Uncertain. So there's a reason for suspicion, maybe some worrying circumstances.
Exactly. There's cause for concern, but no witnesses, no hard evidence that something forbidden actually happened. It's this state of uncertainty that triggers this very unique legal process.
So it's completely different from, say, a standard trial with evidence and judgment.
Totally different category. It's reserved for this specific situation where essentially human knowledge just hits a wall.
Okay, so walk us through the scenario described in the sources. What actually sets this whole thing in motion?
Well, it involves a married woman, a eshet ish. The tradition, as detailed in our sources and related texts, spells it out. It starts when her husband has some reason to suspect her.
Right.
And he gives her a private warning. This has to be done in front of two witnesses. He warns her specifically not to seclude herself with the particular man he suspects.
Okay, a formal warning.
Yes. And then if, despite that warning, she does go off and seclude herself with that specific man, even if nobody sees anything improper during that seclusion.
Just the act of seclusion after the warning.
Just that act puts her into this state called wekted.
Wekted. What does that term really mean here? What do the sources say it implies?
It signifies being suspected, or maybe warned against. It's like a legal status, or maybe a ritual state, a kind of limbo.
Okay.
And it's triggered by that specific sequence, the husband's warning, followed by the wife's action of seclusion. The sources actually use this interesting phrase, wekti en dix da, the FL way, that this state is brought upon her through an external cause.
An external cause, meaning her action of secluding herself.
Exactly. It's not just about what the husband thinks or feels internally. His suspicion gains legal force because of her action, the seclusion with that specific person after she was warned. So the sources emphasize that her actions create the state of legally recognized suspicion, even if those actions aren't proof of impurity by themselves.
Got it. So the seclusion isn't the proof, but combined with the prior warning, it shifts things from just doubt to this specific legal status, wektid, being suspected. And that triggers this unique process.
Precisely. And the sources treat her status as a married woman with immense gravity here. The whole thing, the seriousness, the need for a divine way to resolve it, it's all tied to the sanctity of the marriage covenant.
The marital bond itself.
Yes, a potential breach, even one that's uncertain, carries huge weight because of that bond.
And the process itself, it sounds extraordinary. Bringing her to the temple and offering, drinking these bitter waters.
Yes, the sources follow the biblical prescription. The priest administers an oath, basically asking her to confirm she's pure. If she is, the waters do nothing or even bring a blessing.
And if she isn't? If
she isn't pure, the text says the waters cause these physical effects, a swollen abdomen, a collapsed thigh. It's a divine ordeal, really. The sources are clear about the two potential outcomes described right there in the biblical text.
Which are? Well, they're starkly different, aren't they?
Absolutely. One possibility is that she becomes impure, DXCQ, as the sources term it.
DXCQB, meaning she's found culpable. The suspicion is confirmed by this divine process.
Right. The divine validation of the husband's suspicion. But the other outcome, totally different. If she's actually pure, the sources say, vindicata.
Vindicata, she's cleared, acquitted.
Exactly, cleared. The waters don't harm her. But it doesn't stop there, which is remarkable. The text adds this positive consequence.
Finisra zira.
Finisra zira. She will conceive seed.
Yes. Increased fertility. So not only is she proven innocent, but the process itself is said to result in blessing, fruitfulness within the marriage.
That's incredible. It's not just, okay, suspicion removed. It's like you went through this uncertainty, you were vindicated, and now here's an extra blessing.
Exactly. It's like the trial itself, when overcome, actually strengthens the very relationship that was under this cloud. Purification leads to proliferation. Vindication leads to vitality.
That contrast is huge. Potential devastation on one side, abundant blessing on the other.
Very significant in how the sources present this law. What's fascinating to me here is just the sheer amount of detail. The sources and the original text, they spend so much time on this specific scenario of uncertain impurity, you know, much more than on cases of proven infidelity.
That's a great point.
The focus is squarely on this ambiguous state where human judgment fails and you need something more. It really suggests this state of uncertainty itself has profound symbolic importance, which I guess sets the stage for the spiritual meaning later.
It really does. It shows the law isn't just about, policing behavior. It's also a mechanism for resolving deep ambiguity in a crucial human relationship when trust is damaged, but proof is missing. And the resolution comes through a divine act.
And it sounds like even within the law, there wasn't just one single view. You mentioned sources allude to different approaches.
Yes, the sources note ovex dire deity fideler, basically. Different approaches or understandings exist within the tradition about the details or maybe the application of this law.
So different rabbinic schools of thought, maybe.
Could be. Or just different interpretive strands. It suggests that even the experts grappled with the complexities and implications of this very unusual process. It signals that the tradition itself allows for, maybe even encourages, exploring multiple angles when you're facing something so unique and symbolically rich.
Which makes sense, given how strange the whole thing sounds to modern ears. That plurality of interpretation might be important later, too.
It could be.
Okay, so to recap Section 1. We have this highly specific ancient legal process for a married woman under uncertain suspicion, triggered by a specific sequence warning, then seclusion. It involves a divine ritual for resolution, and it ends either in confirmation of impurity or in vindication plus blessing.
Right. A legal framework designed specifically to handle uncertainty within the sacred bond of marriage.
No. Here's where it takes a turn. Our other source brings in a concept that, well, seems totally unrelated at first glance. A spiritual idea called ipampus.
Shtus D'Leumas Zeh.
Yeah, and that translates, you said, as foolishness corresponding to holiness, or folly.
That's the common translation, yes. Yeah. Foolishness or folly corresponding to holiness, or maybe folly counter to this.
Foolishness, folly, in a spiritual context.
Yeah.
How is that not just bad?
Yeah.
Isn't spirituality about wisdom, piety, reason? It sounds like a contradiction.
It definitely sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If we only think of foolishness in the everyday negative sense, like being irrational, reckless, doing something sinful.
Right.
But in these deeper spiritual mystical traditions, which our source points towards mentioning discourses like Basi Lagani, found in Likutei Sikhot,
Okay.
the term foolishness, it takes on this paradoxical meaning.
Paradoxical how? What does it mean here?
It refers to a state, or maybe an action,
Yeah.
that goes beyond conventional human reason and logic. It transcends it. Because it originates from a level of reality, or maybe a level of devotion, that's actually higher than our everyday reason. Think of it like divine wisdom, or a connection so profound that it just looks like folly when you see it through the narrow lens of limited, rational understanding.
So it's not irrational in a destructive way.
No, not at all. It's about operating on a plane that human intellect by itself just can't fully grasp. So from our lower perspective, it seems foolish.
Like, maybe immense faith. Someone doing something based on faith that makes zero earthly sense, but it's deeply spiritual for them? Is that the kind of thing?
That's definitely one way to understand it on a human level, yes. But the source is also talking about it from a divine perspective, like a quality of the divine itself, or a way God manifests. That seems like a paradox or folly because it's infinite interfacing with our finite reality. The D'Leumas Zeh part corresponding to this, or counter to this, implies it's like a spiritual counterpart to earthly negative foolishness. There's destructive folly, and then there's this holy, paradoxical folly on a completely different level.
A kind of divine truth or devotion that's beyond reason, and so it appears foolish to reason itself.
Exactly. Trans-rationality, but it looks like irrationality from down here. A paradox.
Okay, a holy paradox. Connected to the divine essence, but defying easy explanation.
Precisely. It's a concept used to talk about divine attributes or actions that just don't fit into neat, logical boxes.
All right, so we've got two pieces on the table. On one hand, this ancient, detailed law about uncertain impurity in marriage, needing divine resolution. On the other, this abstract spiritual idea of foolishness corresponding to holiness, divine reality, or devotion that transcends reason, looks like paradox.
Got it.
Now, the main event. How on earth do our sources connect these two? They seem so different, so complex in their own ways. This is the core insight, right? What we came here for.
This is absolutely the core. And it's where the sources do something really remarkable. They don't just, mention both ideas. They explicitly draw parallels. They use the intricate details of the Sotah law as a profound allegory.
An allegory?
Yeah, an allegory to shine a light on this spiritual concept, Shtus D'Leumas Zeh, and what it means for the divine-human relationship.
Using the legal text like a map for spiritual truths. Okay, where do they start building this bridge?
They start right at the foundation of the Sotah law. The fact that it applies specifically and only to a married woman. And that's connection number one.
Okay, we flagged that status as crucial earlier. The gravity of the law depends on it.
Absolutely. And the spiritual parallel the sources draw is just as crucial. They link this concept of Shtut D'Gusha, holy foolishness, divine paradox, to the seriousness of sin. Why is sin so serious? Specifically because the Jewish people are considered, metaphorically, the wife of God, Ishto Sel HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
So sin isn't just like breaking a rule. It's unfaithfulness within the sacred marriage metaphor.
Exactly that. The sources argue that the real gravity of sin isn't just about the act itself, isolated. Its depth comes from the context, this intimate covenantal relationship between God and the people, likened to marriage.
Just like cheating in a human marriage is uniquely awful because of the intimacy and trust.
Precisely. So deviation sin from the divine path is seen as profoundly serious because it's a betrayal within that divine marriage. The sources hammer this point. The status in the law highlights the parallel, status spiritually. This intimate relationship is the context that elevates the meaning and consequence of sin.
And connects it somehow to this idea of spiritual foolishness.
Yes, because sin, in this light, is a going astray, a tishte, within this ultimate relationship. It's a state that, maybe from a higher perspective, involves confronting or experiencing aspects of this paradoxical divine reality, this shtut. It's a departure from the expected path, entering a realm of spiritual complication.
That's a powerful way to think about sin. Not just an action, but a state within a relationship. Okay, so the parallel establishes the nature of the relationship. What's the second connection? You hinted it might be even deeper.
The second connection goes right back to that core detail we identified right at the start. The Sotah law applies only when the impurity is uncertain.
Right.
The lack of definite proof, human limits, needing divine intervention.
Exactly. And our sources take this element of uncertainty and apply it directly to the spiritual realm. They state that even when the Jewish people sin, when they're in a state of spiritual impurity or deviation, sort of like the suspicion in the Sotah case,
Okay.
their connection to God, the ultimate husband, is not definitively broken. They do not reach a point where they become forbidden to their husband.
Wait, that's huge. If sin is spiritual infidelity in this divine marriage metaphor, why doesn't it break the bond completely? Why aren't they forbidden? That's the critical question, isn't it? And this is where the sources bring in powerful scriptural proofs, interpreted through this specific lens. They use these verses to show God's enduring commitment to the relationship, despite human failings.
Okay, what are these proof texts?
They cite two key ones. First, from Isaiah, "My glory I will not give to another."
My glory I will not give to another. How do they read that here?
In this interpretation, God's glory represents his essential, intimate connection, his presence with the Jewish people. By saying he won't give it to another, he's affirming his absolute commitment to this unique relationship. It's like saying, even if the wife, the people, goes astray, the husband, God, isn't going to just abandon the marriage and give his deepest self, his glory, to someone else. The bond, from his side, holds firm.
Wow. So that verse becomes the divine guarantee. The relationship continues, even through the rough patches.
Exactly. It establishes that the possibility of a complete, irreparable break, becoming forbidden, just isn't the reality in this divine marriage. The core connection isn't severed, even when it's strained by sin.
Okay, that's one. What's the second proof?
The second one reinforces it. It's, "He will not cast out a banished one from him." That's from the book of Samuel.
You'll not cast out a banished one. That sounds like God actively holding on or bringing back those who've drifted.
Precisely. It speaks to God's unwavering commitment to ultimately bring back even those who seem banished or estranged because of their actions. So you put these two verses together, as the sources do, and they make a powerful case. The fundamental intrinsic bond between God and the Jewish people is unbreakable.
So, okay, sin is serious, like infidelity. But unlike maybe human infidelity, it doesn't automatically lead to a final breakup in the divine relationship. Instead, it leads to what? A state of spiritual uncertainty.
That's the connection the sources make.
But wait, uncertainty about what? Not uncertainty that the sin happened, right? That might be clear.
No, not uncertainty about the sin itself. It's more like uncertainty about the status of the relationship because of the sin. Is it over? Is the connection broken? And these verses answer, from God's side, no. The bond endures.
So the spiritual uncertainty isn't God being unsure. It's the human experience of distance, alienation, maybe wondering if the bond is broken, while God's commitment remains firm underneath.
That's the crucial distinction the sources draw. The uncertainty is about the enduring nature of the core relationship despite the sin. And this state, enduring yet strained and uncertain, is what the sources directly parallel to the legal uncertainty in the Sotah case.
The legal uncertainty reflects the spiritual state.
Exactly. The human marriage uncertainty mirrors the divine marriage situation when sin occurs. It's a state of questioning, potential alienation, but the underlying bond isn't actually dissolved, just like the Sotah's impurity isn't definitively proven to break the marriage until the divine process reveals the truth.
This really brings that theme into focus. Enduring connection through uncertainty. The law for resolving human uncertainty becomes the allegory for the spiritual reality that the divine connection endures even through the uncertainty caused by sin. And that endurance comes from God's side, from his nature.
Yes. And think back to the Sotah's potential positive outcome.
Cleared and conceiving seed.
Right. The sources imply that this enduring, unbreakable spiritual bond, even in the state of uncertainty caused by sin, holds the potential not just for clearing things up, but for purification, repentance, and a renewed, even more fruitful connection with God.
So it's not just getting back to baseline, it's potential for growth after the difficulty.
Exactly. The spiritual uncertainty isn't about God's lack of knowledge, but about bridging the human experience of distance caused by sin, relying on that enduring divine commitment. The resolution comes through that divine process enabled by the enduring bond.
It's such a message of hope, really, embedded in a law that sounds initially quite severe. The very mechanism for resolving human uncertainty teaches about the certainty of the enduring divine relationship.
The legal uncertainty becomes the perfect teacher for the certainty of the divine connection, which persists through those moments of spiritual uncertainty or feeling distant.
Okay, let's loop back to the other concept, Shtus D'Leumas Zeh, foolishness corresponding to holiness. How does that abstract idea fit with this parallel between Sotah's uncertainty and the enduring bond despite sin? Where does the foolishness come in?
Ah, right. This is the deeper layer knitting it all together. Remember, Shtus D'Leumas Zeh is about a level of divine reality or devotion that transcends reason, looks like paradox or folly. So how does an unbreakable bond that survives betrayal relate to that? Well, think about it from a purely rational human standpoint. The idea that a relationship as intimate and serious as this divine marriage is not definitively broken by infidelity, by sin. Doesn't that seem kind of illogical, maybe even foolish?
Yeah, I mean, our human experience often involves consequences, breaks, severing ties when trust is broken that badly.
Exactly. So God's unwavering commitment, the commitment described in those verses, my glory I will not give, he will not cast out, the very fact that the bond endures despite actions that should, by normal logic, destroy it, that can be seen as a manifestation of Shtus D'Leumas Zeh.
The endurance itself is the paradox.
The holy folly.
Precisely. It's a divine quality, a transcendent level of love and commitment that defies our rational expectations. From our limited viewpoint, it looks like a kind of divine folly or paradox. The enduring connection through uncertainty is the spiritual paradox the sources are highlighting. It's not logical by human standards, but it's presented as holy.
Wow. Okay, so putting it all together, the Sotah law, with its focus on the married woman and resolving uncertainty, becomes the perfect earthly story or allegory for understanding the spiritual reality of the divine marriage.
And specifically, the paradoxical, unbreakable nature of that bond, guaranteed by God, which endures even through the spiritual uncertainty or alienation caused by sin.
Yes.
And that enduring, seemingly foolish connection corresponds to this higher concept of Shtus D'Leumas Zeh.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's the core synthesis the sources are presenting. The legal case gives us a tangible handle on a relationship facing deep uncertainty, resolved only by a divine process that allows for renewal. Spiritually, this mirrors the divine relationship, facing the uncertainty of sin, but not severed, relying instead on God's enduring nature and the potential for purification. The Shtus D'Leumas Zeh is like the divine perspective on this whole paradoxical endurance.
You mentioned earlier, back with the law itself, that the first source alluded to different understandings, different approaches, Ovex of Dyard. How might that detail the existence of multiple interpretations of the law fit into this bigger spiritual picture we've just built? Does it add another layer?
That's a really interesting question. It potentially adds another layer of nuance, yeah. If the legal framework is the allegory, then different ways of understanding the law's details might suggest different ways of understanding the spiritual reality it points to.
Like different perspectives on how deep that connection really is, or how the process of dealing with spiritual distance actually works.
Possibly. Or maybe different approaches to the law subtly emphasize different aspects. For instance, one legal interpretation might focus heavily on the procedural steps the humans take, the husband's warning, bringing the wife.
Highlighting human responsibility.
Maybe.
What?
While another interpretation might focus more on the outcome, the divine intervention, the bitter waters, emphasizing God's role in resolving the uncertainty.
Okay.
Spiritually, these different legal emphases could correspond to different ways we relate to the divine relationship and the process of return, of teshuvah. Maybe sometimes we focus more on our efforts, sometimes more on relying on divine grace. But the underlying truth, the unbreakable bond, remains the constant factor in all interpretations.
So the diversity within the legal tradition itself kind of mirrors the complexity of the spiritual reality. There isn't just one simple way to grasp or live out this idea of enduring connection through uncertainty.
Exactly. It underscores the multifaceted nature of the spiritual truth being allegorized.
There was one other phrase from the sources you mentioned earlier, something about light and unity. CIGLKI Tadajun. How does that weave in?
Ah, yes. CGLKX Tadajun. A connection or drawing down of light related to unity. This kind of brings it all to a culmination point.
Okay.
If the core message is this unbreakable divine bond, enduring through uncertainty through states that look like spiritual folly, then maintaining that connection, or perhaps better, relying on that enduring connection through the challenge, is precisely what allows for this extendin, this drawing down of divine light.
So the connection itself becomes the channel.
Yes. And the light is specifically linked to unity. Unity.
Unity between who or what?
According to these mystical interpretations, it's multifaceted. Fundamentally, it's about restoring or revealing the underlying unity between God and the Jewish people, a unity that sin obscures but doesn't destroy.
Okay.
It's also about achieving inner unity within the person, resolving the conflict and fragmentation that sin or spiritual uncertainty can cause, and maybe even bringing a greater sense of unity and harmony into the world.
So sin creates division, hides the unity. Relying on the enduring bond draws down light that reveals the unity again.
That's the idea. The state of spiritual uncertainty or folly is a state of division, hiddenness. But by accessing that unbreakable bond which endures through the uncertainty, we draw down this divine light that reveals the underlying oneness. Think back again to the Sotah's positive outcome. Cleared and conceiving seed.
Purity and fruitfulness restored.
Right. And why? Because the underlying bond was proven intact. That allowed the flow of blessing, the divine light, resulting in new life, connection, unity.
So it implies that going through these tough, uncertain states isn't just about getting through them. It's actually the process through which a deeper revelation of divine light and unity can happen. The uncertainty is like the necessary backdrop.
Precisely. The uncertainty becomes the stage upon which the power of the enduring connection and the divine light it channels is revealed most powerfully.
And this connects back to the Shtus D'Leumas Zeh.
Yes, because that paradox, the holy folly of an unbreakable bond that defies rational expectation, is the very foundation that allows this transcendent light of unity to be drawn down. Because the connection isn't logically severed by sin, this illogical transcendent light of unity can manifest.
Okay, this deep dive really has gone from, what seemed like a very obscure, specific ancient law to a profoundly layered spiritual teaching. So just to kind of wrap our heads around it, linking the Sotah case, uncertainty in marriage, to D'Leumas Zeh's holy folly paradox, the sources use the law as a tangible example to illustrate huge ideas about the divine-human relationship.
They really do. It's a sophisticated allegory. First, establishing the unique intimacy and seriousness, the paralleling, explaining why sin matters so much. It's within this sacred marriage.
Then, pivoting to the crucial detail, the uncertainty in the Sotah case, karo, using that to illustrate the mind-bending idea that even when sin strains the divine relationship, creating spiritual uncertainty or seeming folly, the core bond isn't broken. It doesn't become forbidden. Supported by those verses, my glory I will not give, he will not cast out.
Exactly. And that unbreakable bond, that endurance through uncertainty, it inherently holds the potential for purification, return, renewed fruitfulness, like the cleared Sotah.
Yeah. And furthermore, this enduring connection, this paradoxical reality that seems foolish rationally, is the actual channel for drawing down divine light, a dex di jin that leads to unity.
It's a whole framework, using the specific to reveal the universal, the legal to reveal the spiritual, the seemingly mundane or even severe to reveal the paradoxical holiness beneath.
So the uncertainty in the Sotah case really becomes this rich, multi-layered metaphor, a metaphor for the enduring divine connection that persists even when human purity is clouded, and how that very connection is the bedrock for restoration, unity, and divine light.
It's quite a journey the sources take us on.
Absolutely. We started this deep dive with, an obscure ancient law, a mysterious spiritual concept.
And following the thread through our sources, we've seen how intricately they're woven together. The details of the Sotah law aren't just historical footnotes. They're being used as this profound, complex allegory for the deepest dynamics of the divine-human relationship.
Revealing this powerful perspective on endurance, the idea that the connection holds, even through states of impurity, sin, actions that look like spiritual folly. The legal uncertainty mirrors the spiritual reality that the bond remains, even when things are unclear from our side. That theme of enduring connection through uncertainty really shines through.
And we learned, according to these texts, that the seriousness of sin is tied directly to the intimacy of that divine marriage. But paradoxically, that same intimate bond is presented as unbreakable, always holding the potential for complete restoration, for fruitfulness, for unity, for drawing down light.
Which leads to, a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over, building on all this. If uncertainty or perceived going astray within a really intimate relationship, whether it's human or this divine relationship metaphor, if it doesn't necessarily mean the bond is fundamentally broken, but maybe points instead towards an underlying, perhaps paradoxical endurance. What does that imply? What does it suggest about the importance of, say, patience? or perspective, or the sheer power of persistent connection when we face challenges, imperfections, moments of uncertainty, or seeming folly in any significant relationship in our lives, spiritual, personal, whatever it might be.
Yeah. What stands out to you from this deep dive, from seeing how these sources connect ancient law to spiritual paradox, all circling around this theme of enduring connection? What resonated most as we explored that